All right, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of CAFC Presents. My name is Doug Maynard. I'm the Associate Director at CAFC, and CAFC is the Canadian Association of Pediatric Health Centers. Today's webinar is titled Youth Leaders at Holland Bloorview, How the Youth Advisory Council is Transforming Care. But before we get to that, I want to make sure everyone is familiar with our webinar process. Everyone is certainly free to come in and out of the session as they please. It doesn't interrupt the session if you do have to leave for whatever reason. We do record the entire webinar, and you can always go back to the recording to catch up on any parts that you might have missed. The recordings and any other resources or documents, PowerPoint slides, or anything else that the presenters provide to us, we can post on the Knowledge Exchange network that you can see up on your screen there. It usually takes me a couple of days to get that information up, and you'll receive an automated message from the system with a direct link to the page, the one that's titled Youth Leaders at Holland Bloorview that's now up on the screen. And that'll take you straight to the page where the audio-visual recording of this session will be posted, as well as any of those other documents that might be shared with us. We do take questions, and for that, to do that, we ask you to type in your questions into the question box that is in the control panel that usually appears on the right-hand side of your screen. I always suggest that you type the questions in as you think of them. Don't feel you need to wait until the end when we call for questions. You can have them in there ready to go so that you don't forget, and we can see at what point during the presentation those questions came in so we can address them to the most appropriate presenter if that's necessary. All right, so with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. With us today, both from Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, we have Dolly Menadak. Dolly is a youth facilitator at in the Center for Participation and Inclusion, helping clients build their advocacy and life skills. Dolly coordinates youth engagement programs at Holland Bloorview, including the Youth Advisory Council and the Youth Mentorship Program. And Dolly also works in the cross-organizational lifespan transition clinic at Holland Bloorview and Toronto Rehab. And interestingly enough, we just posted a presentation about the lifespan clinic. I think it went up yesterday, and that was presented as part of CAFC's, part of our guidelines initiative, one of our communities of practice focused on transitions to adult, from youth to adult care. So you may want to check that out. That's on the Knowledge Exchange Network. You can always just do a quick search on the Knowledge Exchange Network to find that. And we've got that up on the screen there. We also have with us CJ Curran, who's the operations manager, transitions, life skills, therapeutic, recreation, student support services, and music and the arts. So that's quite the portfolio at the Holland Bloorview Rehab Hospital. CJ's professional background and experience in children's rehab spans 20 years. She actively supports Holland Bloorview's commitment to client and family-centered care by providing a formal youth engagement framework within her portfolio to grow and enable meaningful youth participation that is accessed across the hospital and aligned with the Family Leadership Program. So it's my pleasure to hand the virtual podium over to Dolly and CJ.
Thanks, Doug. This is Dolly here, and here's our opening page.
Thanks, Doug. It's CJ speaking. So welcome, everybody. We thought to begin with, we'd give you an overview of what we would like to discuss over the next hour or so with you. We're going to talk a little bit about Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital and who we are, the Center for Participation and Inclusion, our youth engagement strategy. So we actually have three arms to our youth engagement strategy, and Youth Advisory Council is one of those arms that we're talking about today. And with that, we will discuss planning and implementation of the Youth Advisory Council, roles and functions, who its members are, and how the Youth Advisory Council is transforming care. Holland Bloorview Kids Rehab Hospital is located in Toronto, Ontario. It provides specialized programs in clinical care for children and youth with rehabilitation and complex care needs, enabling them to participate in life to the fullest. We are Canada's leading pediatric rehabilitation teaching hospital, dedicated to being at the forefront of clinical care, research, and education. Our work covers the full spectrum from clinical care to treatment, to assistive technologies, rehabilitation therapies, creative arts, life skills, education, and research. Typically, we have 57,000 outpatient visits annually, and I will say that we are very much committed to client and family-centered care, and we strive to apply the principles of partnership, respect, communication in all that we do. Dolly thought to give us an idea as to who our audience was, so that we could perhaps speak to some specific agendas, we might take a poll and ask what your current role is in the organization. So we're interested in knowing how many listeners out there are clinical, perhaps administrative, management, research, or volunteers, and youth themselves.
All right, so this is your opportunity as the audience to just go up and click on the screen and make your choice, just to let us know who's out there. And if you don't see yourself reflected there, just type a response into the question box and just let us know who you are. If you really don't feel you fit into any one of those categories up there, and you can click all that apply if you feel you play multiple roles of clinical and administrative, etc. So. Like we got most of the responses in, and it certainly looks like by the biggest group is the clinical group at 64% of the audience identifying themselves as clinical, followed by the administrative management at 32%. 9% identify themselves as patient family, 9% research, and 5% identify themselves as a volunteer coordination. So back over to you.
That's great. That's great, Doug. Thank you, and thanks everyone for responding. It's nice for us to get a sense, since we're doing a webinar. We want to see where your interests lie, and hopefully we can be able to answer some questions that may specifically interest you as we carry on with our presentation. So I'll hand it back over to CJ.
Thanks, Dolly. So just to give you an idea of what the Center for Participation and Inclusion is all about, we know that youth with disabilities often lack opportunities to acquire life skills as a result of institutional, environmental, and social barriers. Advances in healthcare are leading to longer life expectancies for many children with disabilities. There is an increasing need to effectively prepare children and youth with disabilities for living life as adults. So our focus here in Center for Participation and Inclusion is in the development of skills to enhance what we refer to as meaningful participation. That will include reducing barriers to participation and inclusion, looking at transfer of care to adult services, youth leadership and self-management principles that we like to strive to or towards and adhere to, which you'll hear a little bit more about shortly. Certainly building child and family resiliencies and adaptation, and finally participation intervention. We like to refer to the United Nations definition of life skills. So life skills are a group of cognitive, personal, and interpersonal abilities that help people make informed decisions, solve problems, think critically and creatively, communicate effectively, build healthy relationships, empathize with others, and cope with and manage their lives in a healthy and productive manner. We know as people that any encounter can become a skill-building opportunity, and for all of us, experiences are essential. So within participation and inclusion, we have key methodologies that we adhere to that you're seeing on the screen right now. And we refer to them as real-world learning. So experience-based learning, concrete experience, providing the information needed to reflect, whether that's reflecting on our performance or reflecting on perhaps a mistake that we've just made. Calculated risk-taking is an opportunity to make those mistakes in a supportive environment and learn from them. I think it's fair to say that we can all attribute some of our lessons learned to the mistakes that we've made in the past. So we provide our youth with a chance to gain concrete experience in an environment where the risks have been minimized and are known, but the opportunity is still there for the youth to learn from their mistakes. And then finally, peer teaching. Certainly not last, but equally as important. Someone with similar experience and circumstances, so a peer that teaches and supports one another. And Dolly's going to be speaking to that shortly. And just for any of you that are interested in some of our indicators, performance measurements that we use within participation and inclusion include the Life-H assessment, which is assessment of life habits, the CAPE, otherwise known as the Children's Assessment of Participation of Enjoyment, the COPM, Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, and the GAS, Goal Attainment Scale. Dolly, myself, and some of our occupational therapists collectively developed what we refer to now as Holland Bloorview's Youth Engagement Strategy. And these are opportunities for current and former clients, youth leaders, to engage with Holland Bloorview Case Rehabilitation Hospital. We have 3 streams of the engagement strategy, and I believe we're doing a series of 3 webinars to explain all 3. Today's focus, though, is on our Youth Advisory Council. So you'll see it down the center of your screen. So although our youth programs have a long history here at Holland Bloorview, an overall framework has remained unclear, resulting in some ambiguity and undefined roles, and really lack of structure. By developing this solidified youth engagement structure or framework, we're in a much better position to support Holland Bloorview's commitment to client family-centered care by providing a formal mechanism to enable meaningful youth participation across the hospital and also align with the hospital's family leadership program. Before I hand it over to Dolly to speak about the what, who, accountable, when, and benefit sections of the strategy, I will say that some of our outputs, or how we know we're meeting our objectives, are general awareness of Youth Advisory Council and what it does by Holland Bloorview stakeholders themselves. Certainly an increased number of youth inquiring about Youth Advisory Council and joining, and increased utilization of the Youth Advisory Council by Holland Bloorview stakeholders. And then the flip side of that is we have skill development or output for the youth themselves that are participating on the Youth Advisory Council. Specifically, an increased number of youth who have had opportunity to develop leadership or advocacy skills in a purposeful way, and the Youth Advisory Council members actively participating in those council meetings.
Great. Okay, so here's an opportunity again for a bit of audience participation. What we'd like to know at this point is, do you have at your organization a youth or children's council? So yes or no, and would you like to start a youth council at your organization? And is that really part of the reason why you're listening today, to get some information, the how-tos?
All right, so once again, this is your chance to provide some input. It looks like most of the answers are in, so we can look, and it looks like it's about 60-40 split. 40% do have a youth or children's council, and 60% do not. So we can just go over to the next question about, would you like to start a youth council at your organization? All right, so we can close this one off, and it looks like overwhelmingly 85% said yes, they would like to start a youth council at your organization.
Thanks, Doug. That's great. All right, here we go. So what I want to do is to give you a sense about our Youth Advisory Council and just take you through our members and some information and some details. So our Youth Advisory Council is made up of a group of youth who act as volunteers. They are registered volunteers with our hospital, and they're ages 14 plus. And the Youth Advisory Council, as it meets, they act on behalf of youth interests on issues that are important to youth with disabilities. So what they do is really take the opportunity to represent the views, to provide youth input into program and service development in the hospital. They also provide that input into interested parties in the community, and later on we'll see a story about a community project that they worked on. The Youth Advisory Council also provides a place for staff of the hospital to ask questions to a group of youth that has varying opinions and varying life experiences. And the Youth Advisory Council members don't work with current clients on a clinical level, but they do offer information and input and have advocated for clients and youth with disabilities in the past. So to give you a bit of a historical perspective about the Holland Bloorview Youth Advisory Council, it began in 1996, and prior to this point there was research done into the other children's organizations in Ontario to see where there were examples of successful youth advisory councils already in existence. And there was site visits done as well. And CJ and I were actually talking recently about one of the places that there was a chance to go and visit was out in Mississauga in Ontario, and we had a chance to see their Children's Youth Advisory Council. And on our end, in March 1996, there was an evening that was facilitated by organizational staff here at Holland Bloorview, and it was like a large drop-in of gathering. Youth were invited from all sorts of services and users of the hospital, and they came to talk about the need and if there was real interest for youth to become members of something like a youth advisory council. And there was, and so within just a few short months, there was the first official meeting of the Youth Advisory Council, and 16 young people, youth, attended to help to create and formulate the Youth Advisory Council. In that year, there was development of the executive committee, and as I'm going to be talking, you'll see that our council has an aspect that is really quite interesting. The executive committee of the Youth Advisory Council is all current and former clients of Holland Bloorview. The executive committee is not made up of any staff, although well supported by staff in the organization. So the roles and functions of the Youth Advisory Council are numerous. However, we do believe that clarity of those roles and functions help to give youth a chance to give their input in a way that makes sense and in a way that is easily taken away by the interested parties, so staff and the community. So as I want to tell you, the terms of reference was developed, and this has been a real key aspect of our terms of reference in the Youth Advisory Council, to provide a sounding board for staff, for clients, for parents, and really to help the planning and the development and evaluation of new programs and new services, and also the redevelopment of some programs and services within the hospital. And the Youth Advisory Council members often act as advocates. And as I said, later on I'm going to tell you a story about a community advocacy project. And the Youth Advisory Council, because a goal is to have a youth voice or youth input available to the other task forces and committees that function within the hospital, there are members of the council where they're elected to a role by their peers to be the ones that are specifically informed or that go to these other councils to represent them as a whole, to create communication pathways to the organization back to this dedicated pool of youth. And also, something that's developed over the course of our history is a strong tie to our research institute here at Holland Bloorview. It's called the Bloorview Research Institute, and the Youth Advisory Council gets involved in projects that they feel are meaningful and important for children and youth that have disabilities. And that involvement can be anything from writing letters of support when grants are being written and competition is happening, to actually participating on focus groups, to also agreeing to potentially be research subjects if the project makes sense for a Youth Advisory Council member. So the members of the Youth Advisory Council, as I've said, are current and former clients of Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. Their ages are 14 plus, and I have to say that I really love this photo that's here. I hope you are all enjoying it as well. This is Gabby and Cynthia, our former chair, the last chair, and our current chair. And you know, I think that our Youth Advisory Council attracts young people with disabilities who are very motivated to advocate and make change. And just to throw in a little story, these two young ladies won awards this year. They were nominated for the City of Toronto Youth Impact Awards. Gabby on the left, she won an award for equity and diversity. And Cynthia on the right, she won an award through empowering communities through sport. So as you can see, our Youth Advisory Council members are quite active within the organization and within their communities, trying to create positive change for younger generations. So we were quite proud of them. Okay, there was my story. back to it. So as I said, the executive committee is elected by the Youth Advisory Council members each year, and I did tell you that it's well supported by staff. However, staff don't vote in this process. The staff help to coordinate the voting, and it is determined by the peers themselves. They can see how each other works and often decide what direction they'd like the council to go in for the year. The meetings are held throughout the high school year, so September to June, and members are expected to come to 7 out of 10 meetings, and that would mean they would have things like voting rights and able to run for the elected council. And that's because also the youth feel, this was decisions all made by the youth, but they feel that in order to be able to be well informed of what's going on, they need to be attending 7 meetings a year. So this slide here is really just a visual to give you an idea of how many committees and task forces and projects go on at our hospital that have a youth advisory council representative connected to them. So the point is not about what each committee or project does, but in order to give you an understanding that these committees and task forces do all sorts of things. They are connected to our foundation, they're connected to our senior management, they're connected to our volunteer resources, they're connected to our hiring practices, they're connected to committees that Holland Bloorview reports out to the government on, like our accessibility plan. So the input of our youth is valued and sought after. And to be honest, this is not the entire list, but some of the major points. And the one I would like to highlight for you is the first one, which is our Family Advisory Committee. As you heard, CJ mentioned earlier that we have a family leadership program, and the Family Advisory Committee is something that the Youth Advisory has always had a strong link to, and we do have a member that is elected and goes to the Family Advisory Committee and participates in their meetings, giving direct updates as to what the youth are doing, and brings back to the Youth Council updates about what the Family Advisory Committee is doing. So the idea that we wanted to share with you today is how our Youth Advisory Council is actually transforming care. And really what the next part of the presentation will show you is instances that we wanted to highlight where our Youth Council has been able to get involved in different projects, different ideas, and different community advocacy projects to make an impact on the lives of other young adults and other children and youth living with disabilities in our area. So the few things we'd like to highlight start here with our youth drop-in, and I'm going to give a bit more detail about this one than some of the others because this was one of the first major projects that our Youth Advisory Council took on. As you may remember, we started in 1996, and in 1997, the Youth Advisory Council members determined that socialization with other youth with similar experiences was something that they really wanted to put their hearts and minds towards creating. And the project they took on was creating the first drop-in. And the youth drop-in was here at Holland Bloorview in our gym, and it was lots of fun. It was well attended. There was youth from the transitions years and from the younger years, so starting in high school age. And the youth drop-in was run by the Youth Advisory Council members. They planned, they advertised, they took attendance, they were the ones in charge of snacks, they were the ones in charge of planning the games. And the Youth Advisory Council was so successful at the youth drop-in that it actually became a partnership program that is still run in partnership with Holland Bloorview, the City of Toronto, and a few other local organizations that specialize in supporting people with disabilities, and is now held in the community 4 times a year.
What I would add to that, Dolly, if I may, is for those that are tuning into our webinar, is interestingly over the years, the control of the youth drop-in has somewhat shifted in that it's not as much as youth driven by youth advisory council members anymore, it's more driven by staff. And consequently, what's happened is we've gone from an average of 60 youth attending these youth drop-ins to barely half, perhaps 25 or 30. So we have come together again and had a discussion on what are we going to do about youth drop-in. And, you know, the obvious is let's bring back the youth advisory council members and revisit what the purpose is and get them involved again in the actual facilitating of that program.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that we are looking forward to having those discussions because, as I said, it was really the idea behind fun and socialization that drove the youth advisory council members to create the drop-in. And so you'll see here, the other one from this page that I want to highlight is Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital has had a long history, and part of that, just to give you a bit of background, was that we have had a new building, and when our new building was created, our clients that were inpatients currently for, you know, a variety of reasons in the hospital here had to move to our brand new building. And one thing the Youth Advisory Council wanted to do was to welcome the inpatients to their new home for however long that stay would be. And so the Youth Advisory Council created an inpatient party to welcome the inpatients to their new home because outpatient services were already here. The Youth Advisory Council were already here in our new building, and you saw a picture in the beginning of the presentation. And the Youth Advisory Council members really believed that it was their opportunity to make the inpatients who were coming to the new hospital feel at home and welcome and like they had friends already waiting to encourage them to be comfortable in a new location. So that was one that is interesting and will lead to a bit of a conversation for later on. So as I said, there are times when the Youth Advisory Council does decide to get involved in projects around advocacy. And this was a project that the Youth Advisory Council took on. And you'll see here it made it to the front page of our Toronto Sun here in Toronto. And this guy here on the picture, his name is Raphael, and he was an exchange student from Mexico. And he was here at Holland Bloorview doing his internship with our research institute. And being from Mexico, he had never seen snow before. He had never seen ice before. And you can see it on the picture on the right, he's on his skateboard. In Mexico, this is how he gets around. He sits on his skateboard and propels himself with his arms to and from what he has to do during the day. And while he was in Toronto, he came and got himself an apartment. And by car, I would say he was living about 30 minutes away from the hospital, but he was using public transit, so it was about an hour and a half, and then the weather changed. And he did try to get services in order to make his trip somewhat easier, but had real difficulties, experienced real difficulties with accessible transportation. And he came to the Youth Advisory Council and just said to us, I'm here, I'm part of the organization right now, and I really need someone to look to for help and problem solving about how I can manage in the winter for my placement, for my internship. And so the Youth Advisory Council sat with him and took notes and asked sort of what questions he was trying to accomplish, and he told us it was transportation. And with the advocacy of the Youth Advisory Council, Raphael successfully was given a temporary pass to our Wheel-Trans services for the remaining months that he was in Toronto so he could get to and from the hospital for his internship. And then you'll see, here's a picture of the Youth Advisory Council when they were out at the first disability exhibit ever held at our Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And this exhibit was a historical perspective of the experience of people with disabilities. And the Youth Advisory Council was invited to see the exhibit and then to provide feedback on how robust they thought the exhibit was, if they thought there was things missing, and also to give a personal perspective on the impact if they had known some of the histories of what people before them had experienced living with a disability. And you can see here that it was quite a group that went with all different, bringing all different personal experiences of accessibility and of needs in our community. The next thing, this is another advocacy project that the Youth Advisory Council took on, and it was the Neshama Playground in the City of Toronto. And so the Youth Advisory Council actually got involved with a project being created by the City of Toronto, and what they wanted to do was to be able to provide input into play surfaces, play materials to the people who were designing the accessible playground, but also to provide feedback to the community that was going to be receiving the playground. In Toronto, it was a very long process, but the Neshama Playground was funded in most part by generous donations of a group of businessmen. And they really were looking for advice and insight into creating this accessible playground for their community. And so the Holland Bloorview Youth Advisory Council for close to a year worked with the City of Toronto in providing information and inputs, and actually had regular visits to the community meetings, and also invited the designers and the city councillor representatives to come to the hospital to participate in the Youth Advisory Council meetings with their questions. This project is another way that Holland Bloorview's Youth Advisory Council was transforming care. A group of young adults from Scotland who were creating input into the new design of a children's hospital in Glasgow came to meet with the Youth Advisory Council. They wanted the youth's input, the youth's eyes on what makes a hospital work and what doesn't make a hospital work. And they wanted to know everything from the ease of getting on and off the elevator, to the colors of the walls, to what the Youth Advisory Council members thought about the grounds and surrounding areas of the hospital. So the Youth Advisory Council spent an entire year preparing for these young adults to come and touring them and answering their questions, and also providing workshops and information about youth programming while they were here. This is one of the ongoing goals of the Youth Advisory Council, which is building community capacity. And here you can see a group of the Youth Advisory Council members visiting an accessible community health station. And this community health station provides support and programs and health care, primary health care, to people with physical disabilities in the community. And so the Youth Advisory Council works with organizations like these to provide input into needed programming that will be offered in the community for people that no longer fit the age group of our children's hospital, and feel that it's important to create the link and have the comfort with these organizations, so that when families and clients ask questions about what they should be looking forward to in the community, that they have information to provide. Most recently, in May of 2012, the Youth Advisory Council organized a one-day leadership workshop. And this actually is a photo that has the youth councils from other children's treatment centers in Ontario coming together to work on why leadership is important within a hospital and how it is that we can encourage people to get involved and start early in their involvement. And the Youth Advisory Council supported, after all the hard work and the meetings in the day, supported an ice cream truck to come and gave ice cream to everyone that attended, and also to inpatients in the hospital that wanted to come down and have ice cream as well. It was a lovely Saturday. Ice cream was well received.
Dolly, can you just let everybody know what treatment centers were represented that day?
Yeah, so that day we had Sick Children's Hospital's Children's Council come, and we had Erin Oak come, and then there was Holland Bloorview here as well. And then those councils had major representation, and then also members of other children's treatment councils were invited as well. And here at Holland Bloorview, for 5 separate occasions, we've hosted transitions conferences that have been internationally attended by clinicians, by families, by clients, by healthcare students, and by researchers. And in each one of these transitions conferences, the Youth Advisory Council has supported the steering and planning committee and been a large portion of the volunteers that have been in each conference. And you can see here that we've had the Youth as Leaders Conference had its own youth-focused conference in 2010, which was the Transitions Conference 5, in which they helped with everything from planning the social events for the youth that came, to even organizing the tours of the hospital for the visiting staff, researchers, and families.
I believe they also provided social venues for the youth that were attending the conference, right?
Yeah.
For meals and going out in the evenings.
Yep, we went out to dinner, and also there was one of those youth drop-ins. They hosted one of the youth drop-ins at the same time, and comedy night, really trying to organize ways for socialization amongst youth that would be fun but provide an opportunity for networking. As at that conference, the Youth as Leaders Conference, we were lucky enough to have youth come all the way from Sweden to participate in our conference that year.
Fantastic. So Dolly, I think, has done a beautiful job in giving context to our Youth Advisory Council and how it's evolved over the years, and certainly its critical role in advocacy efforts. Currently, we thought we'd bring you into sort of what the current state now is with our Youth Advisory Council. And we really have 3 goals that we're focused on for 2014. The first one is formalizing the process for inpatient clients to participate on the Youth Advisory Council during their stay here as inpatients and as they transfer back to home. So we historically, I guess, have had a majority member of our youth advisory have been outpatients. So it's really something that we're intentionally trying to do now is advocate for our inpatients and get them on active on the youth advisory. And also to have some impact and input into the transfer of care, so transfer of care back to home. The second goal for us is recruitment of new members. We currently have 12 active members of our youth advisory. That's a healthy number, but in terms of maintaining the capacity of the youth advisory, we are starting a recruitment campaign, I guess, for lack of a better word. And finally, building community capacity. So Dolly has talked, I think, quite eloquently to not only the advocacy efforts of the youth advisory, but when their involvement in community initiatives and the community sectors. And specifically, we want to target the adult sector in forming partnerships that will really help inform and I think inform mostly in terms of transferring to adult services. So when our children, our youth are maxing out with their age of 18 here at Holland Bloorview, then what's next for them and how to make that process as smooth and that transition as smooth as possible. The intended benefits of youth engagement strategy overall for staff is really a better understanding of our client perspective, thus being better able to position and align programs and services across our hospital with clients' express needs, both inpatient and outpatient. And I think before I hand it back over to Dolly for the final couple of slides, one of the biggest lessons we've learned, and that we learn over and over and over again, is that the voice of youth, all the youth that we serve and our clients, are key to successful and sustainable improvements in our patient care and really the quality of programs and services here at Holland Bloorview.
I don't think that I could agree more. I know that it's very different with a webinar, but I was once a client here at Holland Bloorview and a volunteer, and now I'm part of the staff team, and I really do feel that when we make those efforts to have the voice of the young people, the children and the youth that are using services, we really create the best possible options and lead with some amazing care. And I think that actually leads to this last reflection that we have here. These are some statements given by our Youth Advisory Council members about why it is that they chose to dedicate this time. And it is a commitment. 10 months is a long time to commit to these projects. And here are some of the things that they've said, that they want to give back. They want to be able to support the organization. They want to be able to help Holland Bloorview's improvement and make a positive change. So I think those things really speak to what it is that makes someone join a youth advisory council at their children's treatment center. And so at this point, what we want to do is find out if anybody has any questions for us about the Youth Advisory Council or maybe the youth engagement strategy.
All right, so that's a great segue into the question period. So that's an opportunity to remind everyone to type their questions into the question box if you have some. We don't have any questions in the question box yet, but I'm sure people's fingers are quickly flying on the keyboards right now. But in the middle or shortly after that presentation started, I realized I forgot to mention one key piece of information at the beginning, and that we are very happy to have the help of the Canadian Family Advisory Network in bringing this content today. The Canadian Family Advisory Network is a collection of individuals mostly from the family advisory councils that are at many of the children's child and youth health centers across the country, children's hospitals, rehab centers, etc. And it's with their help that we're able to bring some of this family and youth focused content to our webinar series. So I did want to make sure I thanked CFAN for bringing this topic to us for this session today. And as I thought, we do have lots of questions coming in now. The first question is from Krista, and she's asking, what is your recruitment strategy? Like, how do you recruit new members?
Okay, thanks, Doug. So our recruitment strategy that we have here at Holland Bloorview, we have a standard one, and as CJ mentioned, we are going to be focusing on recruiting in a big way, I guess. And so our regular recruitment strategy is that we have Youth Advisory Council information available to clinical staff that work here at the organization, so they can give out flyers and contact information to interested parties. I would say that a big way that we do recruitment is through information found on our website. We have a specific portion of the Holland Bloorview website dedicated to youth interest. Holland Bloorview is actually in process of having this part of the youth website revamped a bit, but the Youth Advisory Council is featured quite prominently in our youth webpage information. And there's a What's Happening box that has stories of things that are important to young adults, youth with disabilities, and oftentimes those What's Happening boxes are features of stories that the Youth Advisory Council has gotten involved in. And we do like to feature also our Youth Advisory Council chair in the What's Happening in the beginning of the term, so that other youth can get to know who to expect when they come to a Youth Advisory Council meeting. And then also the Youth Advisory Council is well known to our family leadership program as well. And the coordinator for the family leadership program, our family partner, Amir, is also, when he is speaking with families that are interested in getting involved at Holland Bloorview, he also provides information to those families when they have youth that are interested in participating as well.
I have a number of people asked the exact same question about how you recruit youth, so I think we've answered many questions in one shot there. The next question is from Ashley, and she's asking how much staff time and resources are dedicated to the Youth Advisory Council.
Well, I'll take a first stab at that one. That's a really good question. When we did the site visits that Dolly was speaking to at the beginning to figure out how we were going to get a Youth Advisory Council off the ground, typically a lot of staff resources were being used, and that we found staff themselves were actually running the Youth Advisory Council and doing a lot of facilitating. So we wanted to do a much more hands-off approach, which in terms of staff resourcing is I guess, less expensive, less resourceful, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was to have the youth actually take control of themselves and the Youth Advisory. But I think we spend maybe half a day a month in supporting youth, the Youth Advisory. We have somebody at the meetings, typically a staff member, who will record minutes at the request of the council members. And then we will have some administrative assistance in kind that will pull together the minutes and circulate for the council. And additionally, we will bring in attendance services for the young people that are attending the meeting, should they need some support with either communication strategies, communication methods, or the other thing we didn't talk about, Dolly, was after each council meeting there is a social component where the youth, we have some food and drinks, and you sit around and chat and socialize for about an hour and a half. So we would require attendance there as well to help with feeding if that's needed by anybody. But that's coming up, do you think, Dolly, about I'd say half a day a week or half a day a month?
I think
on average.
Yeah, on average, and I would say that the coordination piece, so the staff are there to support the meetings, and the coordination piece behind the scenes is really where the staff come in, and the recruitment piece is also something that the staff that supports the Youth Advisory Council is doing, rather than the Youth Advisory Council members themselves. Of course, they're using their own networks and telling people about it, but from the hospital's perspective, the staff recruitment and providing support to staff generally at the hospital and giving information about the council falls to the staff as well.
All right. The next question is from Winnie, and she's asking, how is the Youth Advisory Council involved in research design?
That's a great question. The Youth Advisory Council, when it comes to research design and research work, there are some specific things that our Youth Advisory Council has, and we found over the years that actually having a standard material, like standard operating procedures around how the Research Institute can access the Youth Advisory Council has helped to define that. So with research design, it would have to be a researcher or a research team that is interested in having youth input into design, and that could be things like the research team or researcher wants support with the language that they're going to use in recruitment or in interviews, or that they would like support in determining how long or how frequently components of the research should be available to its participants. So by that I mean they may ask questions like, would you feel that it's better to come for 1 3-hour meeting or 2 1.5-hour meetings? Because the researchers are cognizant of the fact that things like transportation and maybe sitting in someone's wheelchair or needing to stretch or having personal care routines can all affect research participants' availability. And if the research isn't designed to be flexible enough into some often tightly scheduled young adults' lives, that it can be problematic. So it's really things like that. The Youth Advisory Council will also participate in focus groups to help researchers to get an understanding of a subject area they might be interested in before they go away and design that project based on the feedback from the youth. Hopefully, Winnie, that helps. If there's more question about that, please just let us know.
All right. Taylor's asking, or she's saying, you spoke a lot about the positives of having a youth advisory council involved in programming both inside and outside of the hospital, but have there been any challenges in implementing the council or utilizing it?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, I do think that's a good question. I would say that over the years, some of the challenges have been really, it can be recruitment. Our Youth Advisory Council has had some very dedicated members. So I think that refreshing that pool of when very dedicated members age out of a program or decide that they have managed to give what they could contribute and now are carrying on with other aspects of their lives, replenishing those members can be difficult. So I think that once you've had a Youth Advisory Council that has been successful and sustained, that there can be, it's noticed when there aren't members available to provide the same sort of input into the hospital. And I would say another thing has been fluctuating staff time, I think is true. The Youth Advisory Council is been around at Holland Bloorview for a very long time at this point, over 15 years. And I would say that some of the challenges at times when recruitment is low, it can mean more staff time to support the council members that are there and to also recruit those new members. And I think another major thing, especially for hospitals to think about that want to have a youth advisory council, is some sort of training or expectation of the members. We have found, and I think we've really learned this, that clarity of role of a youth advisory council member is extremely important. And that's something that we do talk about with all new members. And when we take on new members, we have a soft recruitment process. We invite people to come and visit a youth advisory council meeting and to see how the council functions, to be able to, we have an introductory PowerPoint that we show people so they can learn about the council's history. And then after that, if they're interested, we then recruit them. We like to give them the chance to see what it is that's involved, what would be the expectations, and if it really fits into what they can do. So I think that that's something that we have learned, that clarity of what the roles are, what the commitment is, and their role as a youth advisory council member to represent the organization, the hospital, internally and externally, is an important aspect to having the success.
I would agree with Dolly, everything that Dolly has said. I would add, we have developed quite an intensive training, series, depending on whether or not a youth is coming in as a youth advisory council member, as a mentorship, as a mentor, in our mentorship program, or as a youth facilitator, which we haven't really touched on today. But I think the other challenging piece, particularly for youth and for some of our staff and our colleagues here at the hospital, is the availability of youth. And reality is these youth, as Dolly alluded to earlier, have typically they're in school, so they're not available Monday to Friday during your average business hours. So, when some of our programs and service areas across the hospital want input from our youth, or they want youth to sit on interviews, there needs to be some flexibility in terms of evening hours and weekend hours, because that's really when our youth are available to commit. And as such, we actually have our Youth Advisory Council meetings on Saturdays. I think they used to be Saturday nights, but they're now Saturday afternoons. And that works really well for them. So I think that's a piece that you have to keep sort of on your mind in terms of youth availability.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And after a while, getting used to being available to have those council meetings on a Saturday, it's always been the way for us, but once a year those meeting times are reviewed by the current council members, and everyone actually by secret ballot votes on the time that they are most likely to be able to attend. And in turn, though, over the years, we have been, pleasantly surprised to see that staff that are really looking for that youth voice as a group come in on the Saturday. They're here, and we've had excellent attendance at our Youth Advisory Council members from senior management. Our bioethicist comes once a year and runs an ethics information education session. Quality and risk at the hospital comes to the Youth Advisory Council meetings, and as I said before, many researchers with projects.
We've had a number of questions about funding, how the council is funded, specifically for projects and the youth drop-ins, et cetera. Can you give us a little more information about where the money comes from? Is it from the hospital, from a foundation, from fundraisers, et cetera?
It actually is all of the above. So we have some Ministry of Health funding. The Ministry of Health funding doesn't support the Youth Advisory Council per se, but certainly some of the other aspects of our youth engagement strategy, it would be embedded in there. For the Youth Advisory Council specifically, we have a very generous funder through our foundation that gives us a donation every year to support our youth initiatives. So that's very much what we rely on. The youth themselves also, that Dolly will speak to it, they have decided themselves that they, I believe it's, how much is it, $5 or $10? Oh, the $2. Sorry, I'm getting confused with something else. They themselves bring $2 every time they meet, and they pool their money so that at the end of the year they collectively decide what it is they want to do. If they want to have a celebration party, I know more often than not they don't spend it on themselves. They decide to buy something for inpatients, or they defer it to the following year to make some more money to sponsor things. So it really is dependent on, I would have to say, funding from foundation.
And I think the other important part to remind at that point is the cost of the Youth Advisory Council from a staff perspective is the staff member that's supporting the Youth Advisory Council and the attendant that's there at the meetings. But the Youth Advisory Council members themselves are volunteers within the organization, and they're actually registered through our Volunteer Resources Department, and so their time is what they're volunteering to the organization. And if you remember that ice cream truck, that was paid for through member dues for the year. They knew they wanted to be able to have an ice cream truck for their visitors, and so that's how they paid for that.
The next question is about the age range of the participants. Is there a specific age range?
That's a good question, Doug. I'll tell you that here at Holland Bloorview, we also, we're very lucky. We have a Children's Council as well. And the Children's Council has members up to the age of 13. And the Youth Advisory Council has gone through some changes over, it's been over 15 years since we've had the Youth Advisory Council. And when initially we began, the starting age of a Youth Advisory Council member was a little bit older than it is now. So the initial limit used to be 16, and that was to coincide with the World Health Organization's definition of youth, and also because youth themselves here at Holland Bloorview felt that 16 was the time that people wanted to start advocating on their own and for others. Now the Youth Advisory Council does take members who are 14, and I will say that just as a little anecdote, there was a Youth Advisory Council meeting this past Saturday, and one of the members said, I really feel like 14-year-olds these days are very mature. And it was such a great observation, because they said, you know, when I was 14, I'm not sure I would have been ready for this, but now I feel that other 14-year-olds are. So our members currently, I would say that the oldest member on the Youth Advisory Council right now is about 24 years old.
It's something that we historically have struggled with in terms of the upper age of our Youth Advisory Council members. We have council members that, not currently, but certainly in the past, that have wanted to stay on the council past the age of 25, past the age of 26. So that's something that is, for us, we struggle with. We certainly, we feel it's necessary to cap it at some level, and we're just.
Yeah, and it's something that we decide. Although I guess important for the answer to that question is we've never had someone older than 29 as a youth leader, because that's really how globally the understanding of a youth advocate or a youth leader from a chronological age perspective ends at that point.
Yeah, I really think we're hovering right now. You can tell that Dolly and I are discussing this because this, again, is an issue for us in our current state, but we're really hovering between the ages 21 and 25 to be our cap moving forward. We just haven't landed on it yet. I hope that was a very convoluted answer.
All right, the next question is about how long youth participate in the committee. Is there a term limit or anything?
That's a great question as well. We do have a terms of reference that clearly states the terms for the executive council members. And the executive committee is a chairperson, a co-chairperson, a treasurer that is in charge of collecting the member dues, and 2 public relations committee members. And those, if you remember, I said that we have a connection to the Family Advisory Committee, and so the public relations members of the executive are very much linked to the Family Advisory Committee. And so other than the executive, there is no term limit on how long someone could be a Youth Advisory Council member for. We do have rolling intake into Youth Advisory, so we hope to have our largest number of new Youth Advisory Council members in September. That's our day 1 of our each term. And then, though, we do take them throughout the year, and we hope that people will be committing from the meeting that they start at until the end of that term. So until June, that's the end of our term. And it can be many, many years. We've had Youth Advisory Council members for 4 years, 10 years, even 13 years on the Youth Advisory Council. And I would say that most right now have been a member of the council for we've had probably our newest member is this year, but after that about 1 year to, I would say, about 4.5 years we're looking at right now. And so age can often be the cap.
Right.
Marie is asking if you can give an example of the type of input that you've provided to a program or service at the hospital.
Great question.
Yeah, it is. I think there's so many that there's one I really like though, because I feel that it's so practical. And it's the story that I enjoy telling. When we moved into our beautiful brand new building here, where we are at Holland Bloorview, the Youth Advisory Council had been a partner in that journey of finding a new space and helping to settle some decisions. So the Youth Advisory Council participated in site visits of all the proposed locations that the new hospital was going to be. And groups of youth supported by actually, a number of staff, 3 I think, actually went with the Youth Advisory Council members to visit the different proposed locations. They gave honest feedback into the proposed locations. And I think I remember the one that's the funniest was a building that was looked at, and it was in the running. It was definitely in the running, and the Youth Advisory Council very, very honestly gave feedback about the length of the halls and the lighting in the building, and they said that the building was just not situated to encourage young people, children, to want to come to the hospital, and the length of the halls was almost overwhelming when they got into the hallways. And of course, we know that that information was carried forward to the committee that was very diligently working on making those decisions, and the Youth Advisory Council feels that that voice was heard, and the building that ended up being the one that we moved into was built actually on site right beside our old hospital. And again, when the building was opened for outpatient care, the Youth Advisory Council did a walkthrough. So they pretended that they were going to be examining the building from the eyes of brand new clients starting at the very front door. And they used the elevators, they sat in chairs, they used their wheelchairs to back into rooms, to go forward into rooms.
They went through meeting doors?
Yeah, they went through the meeting doors, they went to the inpatient areas, they went to the executive boardroom, they examined all parts of the hospital and came up with a list of recommendations. And two that I feel were really important were, number one, the Youth Advisory Council noted that outside of the building there was no clearly marked place for someone to cross the street. And so now we have a very clearly marked place that was painted on. It's a yellow crossed walkway for people to move from the parking lot to the sidewalk that leads to the building. And that was number one on the recommendations list, that there needed to be a queue for children and youth to know where to cross to come into the building that took them right across the driving space so that they would know where they could be, and cars wouldn't be confused about people all over the space where cars come in and out to drop people off. And the second one that was highly adopted was there's 3 meeting rooms in the building that are most frequently used by youth leaders. And those doors were not, they weren't push button doors. You had to use the handle and use your body weight to open the door and go in and out like a regular door. And so the Youth Advisory Council said, as a result, we really feel that these doors need push buttons. And so our executive boardroom, our main meeting room, and our main workshop room, these 3 all have accessible buttons on all doors leading in and out of them. So we feel that those 2 types of things are ways that there was practical input given and definitely acted on. And that's just an example.
I think because the question also asked about programs and services, Dolly, I think another example would be how we have been asked to contribute to clinics, ambulatory clinics specifically, so that when we have young people sitting in the waiting rooms waiting for appointments, we have them engaged with members of our youth advisory or youth mentors in terms of talking about living life as a person with a disability and what happens next, and have you thought about transfer of care and that type of thing. So I think on many levels the Youth Advisory Council members are engaged throughout the organization.
Okay. The next question is from Keiko, and she's asking, how do you usually host your meetings to keep the youth engaged? Do you have any specific sort of winning activities or strategies to keep them engaged?
Wow, these questions are all so fabulous. I would say that the thing that keeps our Youth Advisory Council engaged is that the meetings are run by other youth. They are engaged from the moment they come in and see that it's someone whom they can relate to that is running the meeting. And that has always been, I think, part of our winning strategy that's created such a sustainable council. So all of the executives, as I mentioned, are nominated by the council members, and even the process for nomination is something that the members take very seriously. There's a month when everyone nominates who they'd like to see run, and then the next month, the people that have been nominated that are running have a speech about how they intend to lead the council. And then the third month, this is a 3-month process, the third month there's voting. So I think that alone has really created engagement for youth. And then I think the other thing that we've really started to do is use a part of the time in the meetings to do any project work that needs to be done, so that it's like a working meeting. The Youth Advisory Council does have general business to accomplish in every meeting, but there's time set aside for breakout groups to do work together. And the groups aren't prescribed, but we often try to have at least one Youth Advisory Council member with more experience in each group. And the groups do their work and are able to funnel that information back to the larger group and to the chairperson and to the staff support to be able to make some notes on the work that's been done. I would also say that the staff that's attached to the Youth Advisory Council is something that's important for engagement, to be able to answer those questions and talk to youth when youth are thinking about joining. So those new recruits, it's really important to have the staff person that is enthusiastic about why there needs to be youth participating in a youth council.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you sort of answered this next question in the last question. The question is, how is the content of the meeting determined? And I assume it's you said the executive of the committee is youth, and I'm assuming are in part or maybe entirely responsible for determining the content of the meeting. But is there anything else around how you decide on what the content of the meetings will be?
Yeah, I would say the other way that the content of the meetings is determined, the regular business of the Youth Advisory Council is actually tied quite closely to the hospital's strategic plan, and our agendas are in line with each element of the current strategic plan. And so the business that arises falls into these categories. And so what happens is the hospital staff and interested parties contact the staff support of the Youth Advisory Council to get a spot on the agenda for them to come and visit, for research project proposals, and for new project and service development. And so the staff does coordinate, because as I said, they do some of that back end stuff. So creating a schedule for visitors and guests to be coming, and then meeting with the chairperson in advance of the meeting so that they have an idea about what's coming up and what to expect, and the chairperson is able to give their input into the proposed agenda and make that final determination as to what will be happening that day. I would say that the standing items, though, are things that working on the council's own goals for the year is always a standing agenda item, and also making sure that we are clear about what information we're funneling back to our family advisors, our family partner, because we want to make sure that they're getting the best update that we can give them each month so that they're informed about what it is that the Youth Advisory Council is doing.
Dolly, do you want to comment on how long the meetings are? Because we haven't really talked about that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. The meetings are 2 hours, and that's actually all business there. That's not even including any breaks.
There's a question.
So it's two hours of work, and then, as CJ mentioned, there is time for socialization and snacks, refreshments afterwards, and also the Youth Advisory Council members, because they know each other, you often see them coming in a bit early to spend some time together as well. And that's 10 meetings a year.
All right, the next question is from Krista's asking, are there regular community-based projects, or are the projects mostly based in your facility?
I feel that it really depends. We have done a lot of work with projects based in our organization within the hospital. Also provided lots of input into the lifespan project, the lifespan service that Doug mentioned in the beginning, because that is a partnership program between Holland Bloorview and Toronto Rehab Institute that is specifically concerning youth. So there's been lots of input into that project, into transitions projects. But in our community, when the Youth Advisory Council is approached, like for example the Neshama Playground, and it's something that the Youth Advisory Council feels is important and impactful for children and youth with disabilities, they determine if they're going to get involved, and I would say often that they do. But I would say that if we were looking for which one is more, I would say it's more related to projects and services related to the hospital than in the community, but there is still a strong community component.
And sometimes there will be competing requests for our Youth Advisory Council, and at that point the Youth Advisory Council chairperson will approach the staff member that's assigned to support the council, and that staff person can help the Youth Advisory, or collectively they can prioritize what we're going to get involved in.
I did have a question from Maria asking what does a monthly meeting look like. I think we've sort of answered that when you talked about how the content is decided and all that. Is there anything else to add about sort of just to give people a vision of what is happening in that room when those kids are in there?
I would say maybe just the other thing that's interesting is the use of technology in the meetings. The meetings are held in rooms that are enabled for the use of technology. So there are screens, there's a computer available, and so the staff support can often pull up the information that's being discussed just to make it easier for people to see it, although information is provided in hard copy as well. And to our Youth Advisory Council members that potentially use communication devices or that use computers to do all of their own work, the staff support sends the material to those Youth Advisory Council members in advance so that they can come with the information loaded onto their devices. And because Holland Bloorview has wireless internet access for youth here in the building, they can log on to be able to use their own emails if that's how they are receiving the information from the organization.
All right, I think this is, we just got a couple more questions. We do have we're scheduled until 12:30, so it looks like we should finish on time. So if you do have any last burning questions, get them typed in and we'll make sure we get them asked. This next question is kind of interesting. It's sort of on the negative side of anything that you might experience with this council. But the person's asking, have you had any experience in having to give feedback to a council member about expectations about appropriate behavior, maybe during social time or anything like that?
Yeah, we have actually. Really good question. Dolly's nodding her head. She wants to speak to it. Do you want to address this one?
I do think that's a great question, and it's something it's something for the organization, the hospital, to be prepared for, that staff member that's supporting the council. I would say though, over the years, the really interesting development has been the self-correction by peers. And we've had many experiences over the years in the Youth Advisory Council where, for whatever reason, if there's behaviors that are inappropriate or potentially turn-taking issues where not everyone is getting a chance to talk when they'd like, that the council members have created a space for themselves where they do a lot of self-correction. And a part of our Youth Advisory Council, although they are volunteering their time, they are connected to the hospital because they're clients, current or former clients. And the skill development of advocacy is quite clear in these meetings. And we can see that the peer environment, and because it's run by a group of elected peers, there's a lot of the correction coming either from the executive elected committee or from the neighbor of the person sitting beside the one that's not that ain't sharing. And so we'll see that. We will see there's the immediate feedback of, hey, I wanted to say something and it's my turn now. And the council adapts to the right behavior structure for that meeting and that time. Anything from, it's been suggested during meetings, okay, let's all take turns by raising our hands, or everyone counts to 2 and then you see if that person was done and then it's someone else's turn. So there's lots of learning involved. But I would say also there have been times when the staff support has had to take someone aside to give the feedback about expected behavior in council meetings or even in the social times afterwards. And that staff person, the staff is always quite aware of making sure it's done quietly but immediately after and in a private fashion, so that person, that youth advisory council member, can ask questions and use it as a learning opportunity rather than have it happen in front of all of their peers. So I think that's a good question, and the staff support has to be comfortable and also aware of the behavior of what's going on the council. And I would say the Youth Advisory Council, in order to create a sense of confidence in the council members, decided a while ago, as CJ mentioned, we do have a training program for youth mentors. It's an intensive training program. And for Youth Advisory Council members, one of the training components that each go through is a script about how you present yourself when you're meeting with other people, and how the expected behavior is at meetings when you're representing the Youth Advisory Council and also at the Youth Advisory Council. And so this is actually hard copy material that's given to members, and it's practiced as a group. It's discussed each year and practiced, and it gives people the opportunity to get comfortable with what's expected of them. And one of those things is, it's called Youth Leaders Etiquette. And one of those things is even a working document created by the youth as to behaviors to be successful before, during, and after a meeting. And it was created by youth for other youth.
I would just add that I think it really reflects our, early on in the presentation we talked about our experiential learning in the real world. And by virtue of the youth learning from their peers while they're actually engaged in a Youth Advisory Council meeting is very, very impactful.
Can't even talk now. Andrea went on to say that has been an infrequent but challenging experience for them at their youth council. So I'm sure she appreciated all that information. The last question is asking about your ability to share she talked about the Youth Advisory Council roles document, but you've been talking about hard copy stuff, the terms of reference for the council, your etiquette document that you were just referring to. Is any of that information online? You do have a page on your website about the Youth Advisory Council, and Dolly, your contact information is on that page, so I'm sure people can get in touch with you. But is any of that other documentation online anywhere, or are you able to share it perhaps through the Knowledge Exchange Network or anything like that?
Yeah, it's certainly, Doug, as Dolly alluded to earlier, we're in the process of updating our website. So it's currently not online. But we would definitely be willing to share through any venue that you think would be appropriate.
All right. Yeah. So if you're willing to share it on the Knowledge Exchange Network, where we post this this recording, or even if you wanted to create a page about the Youth Advisory Council with some documentation. I know the Canadian Family Advisory Network has a section on the Knowledge Exchange Network, and that might be a good spot. So I think there'd be lots of interest in that, and we can help. Either Dolly's contact information is up on the screen on the Holland Bloorview website there, and we're happy to direct people to the information as well if we can get it available. I'm sure people are champing at the bit to get it.
Yeah, we'll definitely commit ourselves to doing that. Absolutely.
Well, that's the end of the questions. So I think we're just about at 12:30, so perhaps this is a good time to wrap it up. So I'll hand it over to you guys for any final comments that you'd like to end the session with.
I think we just want to say thank you very much, Doug, for having us, and we hope that everyone has gotten something out of our webinar today, and to say that this was a reminder, this was one of 3 arms of our youth engagement strategy, the other 2 being youth mentorship at Holland Bloorview and youth facilitators, which is a paid role on the rehab team. So we hope that you'll join us in future to hear about those.
All right, well,
Oh, sorry, Doug. I think Dolly has wrapped up nicely, and I have nothing to add, really. I don't want to.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a fantastic presentation, as you can tell by the number of questions that have been asked and the great discussion that was had. I mean, I think it was really fantastic. So with that, we'll close this session off. I just wanted to remind people again that this it was great to have the help of the Canadian Family Advisory Network, and in particular Laura Williams from Holland Bloorview and Kate Robson from Sunnybrook, who are the current chairs of the Canadian Family Advisory Network. And if you do have if you do want more information about the Canadian Family Advisory Network, you can go to our website that's on the screen right now. It's in our section on patient and family-centered care, and there's contact information so that you can get in touch with any of the CFAN members, the chairs, and I think the executive all have their contact information up there. So if you do have other information or questions about family advisory councils or youth councils across the country, that would be a great group to get in touch with. If they don't know the answer, I'm sure they can point you in the right direction. And with that, we'll close off. We do these sessions usually every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We do always record these and post them on the Knowledge Exchange Network. It takes us a couple days to get that information up. So you should get an email. For those of you who have the email registered on the webinar, you will get an email directly with the link to get that information later. And we do hope to see you on the next session. All right. Goodbye, everyone.